My name is Jason.
My name is Tom.
And this is Fear of a Black Dragon, an old school RPG podcast.
And in this episode, good luck storming the Ivory Tower. It's the Academy Chrysalis.
Our first segment is the basic crawl.
The Academy Chrysalis is a 69-page incursion for Trophy Gold, written by Patrick Munari, with illustrations by Seraphine Lee, Savannah Gentry, Ballantine, and Patrick Munari. It was edited by Anna Dardek. The scenario is presented with Trophy Gold in mind, but does contain conversion notes for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition and Old School Essentials. From the introduction we learn, among the erudite and wealthy elite of the city, it was once commonplace to discuss the astonishing reports, lauding discoveries at Caprigair's Academy. Nestled deep within the forest, this prestigious and remote school grappled with both the empirical and the arcane. Spells and artifacts engineered through rigorous research, fueled by the powers of the land. With each new communique, whispers grew and spread. Those in the know believed the scholars of Caprigair's to be developing a grand, innovative magic, a ritual to pierce reality and open a portal to another world. One day, without notice, the school sealed itself away from the outside world. Erected around the campus was an enormous and impenetrable magical barrier, referred to colloquially as the Chrysalis, and the flow of progress reports ceased. Most believe the school isolated itself in order to preserve its secrets. Had the scholars finally finished their research? Were they clinging to their knowledge for fear of theft? Any information about the school would sell for a high price. Even better, knowledge about the alleged grand ritual could secure power, status, and profit. Those valiant few who travelled to the lush tongue, the deep part of the forest where the school resides, either fail to penetrate the chrysalis or return empty-handed, if they return at all.
The contents of the book start with a set flowchart, which is a convention of Trophy Gold. It's a high-level map that shows how the major areas of the dungeon, called sets in Trophy Gold, connect to one another. From there, we get a short description of the theme of the incursion, another Trophy Gold convention. The theme this time around is bubbles. From there, we have the introduction, including a secret introduction that is for the GM's eyes only. This section also has content warnings and an Appendix N of media recommendations. Next is a character sheet. This incursion provides some brand new character options not available in the core Trophy Gold game. It also includes an interesting table for creating a brand new character in the middle of the incursion should yours die. This character is one tied particularly to the setting. More on that later. Next is a section discussing the impacts of colonialist land theft on the Illithin, the constructs who are native to the land the incursion takes place in. Then we have special rules for knowledge as treasure. Much more about that later. From there we have our sets, which is the bulk of the text. The sets are the village Needlepoint, where the treasure hunters start their adventure, arriving by hot air balloon, and which is the home of the Illithin, a species of curious mannequins. The river path to Caprigair's, which is the initial journey from the village up to the bubble-encased academy. The wellspring, where the characters start to learn about the source of magical energy the academy was studying and harnessing. The main floors, filled with libraries, ritual halls, and all manner of horrifying monsters. This is the main dungeon portion of the adventure. The astronomy tower, home of the pupa. Oa's Deciduum, a strange pocket dimension that figures prominently in the dungeon's resolution, and the Hatched Castle, which is the big finale set. Next is a section on concluding the adventure, and from there we have the rules for Trophy Gold and the aforementioned conversions to 5e and OSE, none of which is within our remit, and so we won't discuss it any further. Tom, our bona fides here.
Yes. Well, mine are minimal. I have read it. How about you?
I ran it for 4 sessions using Trophy Gold. I ran this as intended. Probably the first time that's ever happened on this show. I know, yeah. So you're getting a really particular viewpoint from me today, folks. Things we liked. Okay, let's start with high-level stuff.
Yeah.
I'm going to say that, having played it, this module knows exactly what it wants to do, and it does it very well. The central idea of knowledge as treasure, and in particular how the acquisition and exploitation of that knowledge affects the people it was stolen from and how it affects the broader world as well, it is so good. I'm going to save a lot of the details for the Expert Delve because it's the focus of the Expert Delve, but I will say that the author has incorporated an issue that's sort of related to modern day social justice issues, but it's done in a way that doesn't feel ham-handed, and I think that makes it really effective.
I think the thing for me that stands out, and maybe stands out less for you because you play a lot of Trophy Gold, but one of the big strengths of the way that Trophy Gold incursions are designed is they are designed to deliver a hugely dense amount of very evocative images and I was about to say set pieces, but I mean, they do have set pieces, but also just little vignettes.
They're literally called sets.
Yeah. But when I say set piece, you think about like a climactic fight scene, but actually it's just these little interesting scenes, and Academy Chrysalis does that so well. Like, it's just every page has something that you like. And actually, the thing about having these quite long bullet point lists of 1 or 2 line images, sensory evocations, is that it's like the airplane school of joke writing. You didn't like that one? Don't worry, here's another one. Didn't like that one? Here's another one. Yeah. There's going to be something in there that you're like. And frankly, I think I probably liked about 80% of them, and the rest was still good as well. Like, I really thought I'm not totally sure it delivers on the Bubbles theme that well, but the actual aesthetic it does have, I think it does that really consistently all the way through, and ramping it up in terms of it's not body horror, but this idea of a corporality, changing bodies, increases all the way through. It starts by calling the adventure the Academy Chrysalis, and goes from there. And I really liked that, a real density of imagery, which is what you need. You need to be able to glance at the page and have something just fall in front of your eyes, and it does that really well.
Yeah, I agree completely. And that is a combination of 2 things, right? As you sort of intuited there, it's just really well written, and there are lots of great little evocative things in there. I think Patrick did a good job of like painting the picture of the world that they wanted to paint. But also it's a combination of just how Trophy Gold works as well, which Trophy Gold, it comes from this like particular school of dungeon design, which is more about giving the GM like cool things to play with and to improvise with. By necessity, it has to be like really focused on just evocative images and cool things that you can kind of grab almost like in a toy box kind of way and use, rather than, okay, here's step 1, here's step 2, here's step 3.
Yeah.
And so, it's a combination of things, but not to take away from what Patrick wrote, though. It's really, really good.
Yeah.
I was reading this, and there's not a ton of third-party Trophy Gold modules for one thing, but I don't run a lot of them anyway, just because we've published, for people who don't know, I'm co-publisher of Trophy Gold. Like, we've published so many that I have plenty to choose from of the stuff we've published. But I really loved this one because I think it's just so really well realized and very, very evocative. And it still feels like it's part of like the trophy world, despite the fact it's not something we published. Mm-hmm. And I like that about it as well. But also, I just think it really nails like what it's trying to do, like there's something to be said about like going in with like a really particular point of view, in this case, like the exploitation of knowledge and what that means for the world, and kind of executing on it. It's really, really good, really solid stuff. Let's talk about the art. I'm a little torn on the art.
Yeah, me too. It's
a little torn on it.
It's the style is not my favorite thing. I found it a little bit crowded. Now, admittedly, this is coming from a guy whose own kind of layout style, at least in initial drafts, tends to be, oh no, there's been an explosion at the design factory. But I found it a bit crowded, which I think is something to do with a part of the standard layout for Trophy a little bit. It has this sort of not landscape, but landscapey orientation, which I found a bit hard to deal with. But I will say there are some really good decisions about giving you a big visual impact when you flip the page in a couple of places in particular, which is there is the illustration of the chrysalis on page 21 and 22. And it's very simple in a way. It's this sort of, is it watercolor? I guess it's like a monochrome watercolor.
It's kind of a monochrome thing. I'm not sure.
And it's just showing the chrysalis towering above the forest.
Yeah.
And you turn the page and you suddenly have this vivid image of just how big it is, which is great. And then later, when you get to see the pupa, it's like a sudden palette change, right? You've been going greys and blacks and whites, and then, whoa, hey, what's going on here? And it's not, it's still mostly black, I think, on that page, isn't it? But it's flipping the orientation of the colours. And to be honest, I kind of wish there'd been more of that. Maybe delineating sections by doing color codes.
I felt like the thing overall was too gray. It had this sort of like smoky grayness that just sort of started to run into each other a little bit.
Yeah.
I guess it did make the pupa moment, which is this really striking black and red thing. It did make that a little bit more pronounced, I guess, but it made it feel more important. For me, I'm a little torn on the art because it's really strange. I actually like each individual piece quite a lot. Like, I think each individual piece is really good. I don't know that I love them all together.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, like I kind of feel like something about them all being together just didn't quite work for me. But I liked each of them individually quite a lot. I thought they were each individually really good. They just didn't, in some places, didn't really feel like they melded. It's a fairly small criticism, though, because overall, the pieces that are really, really good are great. Like the bull and the ritual circle, the pupa.
The bull actually is really, really good as well.
It's so good. Yeah. The three-headed heron. Yeah. There's a character called Oa. The pieces are so great that you kind of overlook this strangely blended together style, I guess. So, other things we liked.
Let's talk about some of the set pieces. So let's start talking about... Actually, I think weirdly, my favourite bit is the village at the beginning. Mm-hmm. This idea you have to travel to somewhere first in order to get to your destination, which actually is quite a common... this is my obsession with fantasy non-fiction again. Quite a common thing in travelogues. Well, actually of most eras, really. Like, we want to go to one place, therefore we have to go to the village at the foot of the mountain and find out the way. We don't even know the way in. And that's really attenuated in the Academy Chrysalis, is because the way in is you have to get a particular substance so you can even pass through the barrier. It's not like knowing which path to take. And the little mannequins, what are they called again? The Illithin, is it?
The Illithin?
Illithin. Yeah, I really like them. They look creepy. They remind me of, do you remember in What's the Least Good Enemy Within Adventure? Something rotten in Kislev. There we go. They have the bit with all
Is that the one with the zombie town?
Yeah. But there's that adventure with all the kind of Russian folk tales and the little beings that come out of the corn. And they sort of made me think of them. They feel a bit like robots or something, but not really. They're just really, really cool. I like them. Yeah.
Yeah. In play, they present this really interesting mystery because, listeners, just so you have the proper context. So in the setting of Trophy, there are mannequins. They're like a species in Trophy, essentially. But they look different and they're very regional. And that's what makes this group of mannequins so great, because they, even though they're like constructs, they have this regionality and this culture of their own that they've sort of developed, which is really terrific. And it manifests in like how they're constructed. And so they have it in the center of their corpus, I guess, this sphere, a glowing sphere, and it presents this really terrific mystery right in the beginning, because the mannequins don't talk about those glowing spheres, but you can observe the mannequins interacting with their own little glowing sphere, and that glowing sphere has a connection. It has a connection to the broader story that unfolds as you do the incursion. And so it's a really good way of dropping the player characters into an unusual environment, but also like starting to lay the breadcrumbs of like, okay, this is kind of where the story is going. This is what the story is about. And in some sense, it almost mirrors the broader theme of this incursion, which is knowledge, right? And the acquisition of knowledge and like what that means for the setting. I really, really loved it. Players loved it too. The players were really, really into those mannequins. The mannequin village is great. I like the astronomy tower a lot. That's a cool set piece. When the characters finally got to the astronomy tower, they actually fled to it because they were getting their asses kicked in the in the main floors, and so they were just like running, they spent like part of a whole session just running basically, and they ran to the astronomy tower, and they thought that like, okay, now we get a breather, but you don't. Like, it becomes this like, it's this completely weird like reality bending. It has vibes of like the finale of Castle Ravenloft or like a Dark Souls thing. Like, it's got this like kind of vibe because it's got this huge heart-like pupa and like all this strange ritual shit going on. Like, it's a really, really cool set piece. Really, really fun. And this kind of goes to another thing I really like about the incursion is each next part feels like a payoff for the thing you just did. Yeah. So you do the little village, you do the little journey, which has some, little things you do. You get inside the chrysalis, you have this encounter with the wellspring, and you sort of are starting to figure out the mystery of this place. You do all that, then you get into the actual academy, and it feels like a very sweet payoff because the academy is fucking bonkers. And then even past that, you might get to the astronomy tower, which is just like a whole other level of like, it just turns it up to 11. And it all just like feels really coherent and solid, and it feels like you're being rewarded as a player. Like, it feels like you're always being rewarded to like push in deeper, which I think is great.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. It's hard for me to judge what that escalation is like, actually, because one thing I noticed about the finale is, well, firstly, I think, okay, this is going to sound bad, but I promise it isn't. Well, you be the judge. It's not much on the page, right? It's sort of, here are some stats for the 3 parts of the academy that are trying to kill you and that you might want to try and defeat or flee from or whatever. And there's not much else to it, but I realized that's because it's that point in the adventure where you don't need more than that. The characters' decisions and feelings about everything that's happened previously is going to just inform everything that happens there. I forget who it was that once wrote that OSR adventures shouldn't have an ending. They just need the first 2 acts and you just leave it. And I feel like that's kind of what the finale part does.
It kind of is, yeah.
It's grindingly predictable in a sense, like, because it's one of those ones where you go, oh wait, a chrysalis. Yeah, of course something's going to hatch and it's going to turn into a different larger creature. But of course, that's a satisfying payoff. If you have a chrysalis and it doesn't turn into something, what is the point?
What's the point of it? Yeah.
So it's great, and I think I like that it's just
chrysalises do one thing.
Literally one
right,
thing. Yeah. You had one job, academy-sized pupa. So yeah, I think it's really good that it just leaves that big space for the characters to kind of effectively create for themselves. And I imagine, well, we have no empirical way to test this yet, but it's going to be different for every group, isn't it, right?
Well, yeah, and it's a trophy thing as well, right? An interesting thing about trophy adventure design, this is true for Dark and Gold, is like in Dark, for example, Ring 1 and 2 are much more fleshed out and detailed than Rings 3, 4, and 5. And that's because Rings 1 and 2 are before the rules of Trophy have had a chance to kick in and change the story. And so by the time you get to Ring 3, Ring 4, and Ring 5, the rules of Trophy and the sort of collaborative emergent story that Trophy kind of does have started to kick in and change things so much that you don't need a lot of detail in those final rings because your own group's version of it is changing things quite a lot. And that's true in Trophy Gold as well. By the time you get to that finale thing, you may not even get to that finale thing because of decisions that have been made beforehand. But if you do, it's essentially just like an idea. It's like, okay, well, maybe this will happen, GM, and adapt as needed.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of like to put it in a more traditionally D&D OSR frame, it would be like if you had mostly random tables happening at that end.
Right.
All of the sort of random encounters you've triggered on the way in will now come and haunt you as you attempt to do the last bit, right? So
yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a good like OSR analogy. I like that a lot. The last thing I'll say, that things I really loved about this, that on the fly character thing is so cool.
Oh yes,
we didn't get a chance to do it in my game because the characters didn't die, but in theory, I love it. So what it is like if your character dies on the adventure, there's like a table of types of characters who might be in the setting who can now be a new character. So
you could be one of the mannequins from the village who joins the adventure, that kind of thing.
Yeah, or like some withered, bedraggled scholar or whatever, right? Like, which I think is super, super cool. Just a good touch. And it's a really thoughtful touch too. Like, it's the kind of thing that I wouldn't have thought to do if I was designing it. And so the fact that someone did, I'm impressed by that. It's like, oh, that's what a good thought.
I want to call out a couple of small features that I thought were very, very cool as well. I like the desiccated scholar who's haunting, is it the water pump house or something on the outskirts of the academy?
Yeah.
He sort of reminds me of that witch in Deep Carbon Observatory who's gliding around under the water.
Yep.
The same kind of vibe. The Petripede, who's actually my chain lightning, so I'll shut up about that.
Absolutely kicked my group's ass. Oh my God.
Not surprised. Wait till you hear the description in a second. But also using the detergent to get through the chrysalis, this kind of material. This is really powerful. And of course, it's the inverse of what you're trying to do. You essentially sacrifice knowledge and forget it. This is a very powerful thing, which coincidentally enough, I just got done translating an adventure from Portuguese to English for The Elephant and McCaw Banner, available in all good bookshops, listeners. And it has this very thing where you can sacrifice your memory of an entire skill that you have at a particularly advanced level in order to get some information from a big cosmic snake. Now, obviously, there's no cosmic snake here, but it's similar because I think it's something that's very visceral in a way that, for example, sacrificing some equipment or money or your +1 sword isn't, because this is a thing that you, the player, actually get to use all the time, like something your character knows, and now it's going to be gone. And also, just from a horror fantasy point of view, what would it? We all know what it means to forget stuff, but what would it mean to deliberately forget something?
Yeah.
Have you effectively killed the version of yourself that knew that thing?
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
I will tell you, in our playthrough, this happened in the second session for us, and The players loved it. Okay, for one thing, like they really loved it. And I was actually a little worried about it because when they like use the detergent to literally like wash away a part of themselves in order to enter the chrysalis, it's big, profound changes. It's like changing your character's drive, which is a really big deal in Trophy. And I remember thinking, am I de-protagonizing them right now? Like, is this going to be a problem? Like, are people going to feel like cheated? I felt a little like uncomfortable about it, but they loved it. They thought it was so cool. And I think what helped make it go down really well is Patrick wrote it in such a way that it feels like a natural part of the setting, because every time the character would use the detergent to clean away a part of themselves, a part of their body would turn white.
Yeah.
And so one player's hands turn white, one player's eyes turn white. And I think that detail actually helped the players think, oh, okay, like this is just a thing that happens, and this is clearly how it's meant to go, because look at this thing that connects us all, right? It kind of gave it legitimacy in a weird way.
Yeah.
And it's the kind of thing that like unless you run it and play it, I don't think you like realize that it's going to work, which I think is really intriguing. And the reason why you should run things before you review them, listeners. Mm-hmm. So, or at least one of you should.
minimum one out of
a minimum of one.
50% of the hosts. Yeah,
yes, exactly. Shall we go to questions?
Yeah, let's do some questions. This one, I can't really phrase it as a question. It's just a complaint. I would have liked to have something like a schematic map, or maybe just a bulleted list at the top of each section of places in the village, places in the academy, because I found that reading this, the relationships between props and traps and the other, sections that you have in each geographical or location or adventure segment were not really very clear. And like on a read-through, when you're doing your pre-game read-through, that's not too much of a problem. But I could see that in play, this was going to get a bit page flippy, a bit, oh, where did I see that? How was it in actual play, though?
It was. This is probably the weakest part of this. It was very page flippy. And I'm particularly in a position to criticize this, I guess, because the official like kind of trophy gold layout for incursions is what Jesse, the creator of the game, calls the dashboard layout. And so the dashboard layout, the idea is when you have the book open, all of the information you need for the set is right there on 1 or 2 pages. And you should be able to open it up and look at it all at once. That's Doug Jesse's really particular about that. So the props and the treasures and the traps and the moments and the description is all on. You don't have to flip pages. Like it's all right there.
It's never a page flip, right?
Yeah. And so that was a weird thing to get used to with this. It wasn't like the end of the world. It was fine, but I didn't feel like I was able to like quite improvise as quickly and ably as I would have liked just because of that layout. Yeah.
Okay, that does give me a question related to this then, which is how do you fix that? Do you just make the location quote unquote smaller? Do you split up that part of the adventure into smaller segments so each one can be on a spread? Would that be the effective thing to do you think?
Okay, so this question is above my pay grade. So like, here's the thing. In Trophy Gold, it's not so much a matter of the geographic or physical scope of the thing. It's this thing, whether it's as big as a football field or as small as a room.
Yeah, exactly. It's like it's one area of play space. It's a unit of
it's one area, it's one unit of play space, and it has props, it has traps, it has treasures. And so that's how you think about it. And so just the mere fact that like the props are not in this one, the props are not on the same page as the other props, like that makes it kind of like a weird thing to sort of navigate. I will say in Academy Chrysalis' defense, it was part of Zine Quest, and so it had to fit a zine format. And so maybe, obviously that's a...
Oh yeah, no, in that case, I can imagine
a compromise.
They probably tried the dashboard layout and went, no, this is unreadable. And then
well, that's what I'm saying. They probably did try to do the dashboard, and it just didn't work out.
Fair enough.
I would love it if Patrick would release a dashboard layout version of this. I think it'd be super cool. My question is, I'm curious to get your opinion as a person who maybe doesn't run Trophy Gold much or at all. I'm curious, reading this, would you feel comfortable with the negative space of the incursion? Meaning the things that are not spoken on the page that you're meant to infer or like you're meant to like play around in?
Yes, although I think this has been well established. I have a suspiciously large amount of story game background. But no, I think this does have similarities to some more traditional OSRE things as well. Like if you think about hex crawls, where it's like, here's one thing in the hex and here's a list of D6 things that might be happening when you come along. I'm thinking right now of the recently released Primal Quest by Diogo Nogueira, friend of the show, is he? Well, he is now. And which has exactly this sort of quite spare way of addressing things and leaving you to figure out the connections between other parts of the game. Now, what, of course, OSR modules that do this don't traditionally do very well is explain that you're supposed to do that to the GM. So you often get people a bit nonplussed about how does this random table work here. So I thought it was very effective. If anything, it was sort of borderline too much. I kept sort of feeling like I was, I should memorize all this stuff. But of course, no, you're not really meant to do that. You're meant to just start with the top line and then let your attention cascade down to the different specific bits as needed. So, no, I think if you have run reasonably sandboxy games before, you'd be quite happy with it.
Okay.
Where you would struggle would be if you had done, what we might call trad mainstream gaming only, with sort of here's what happens, and then when the orcs see you, they'll do this or this, and then you can decide to go to scene 2 or scene 3. There, I think you might struggle a bit, because you would look at that collection of moments in, say, the village at the beginning and think, wait a second, these don't seem connected at all. What am I supposed to do with this?
Where does this happen? Yeah.
Now, of course, part of that is because of the way Trophy works, where you are doing things like hunt rolls to uncover things, and then they have complications, and that's when you draw on the materials at hand.
Right, yeah.
But equally, that's fine, because that's just the underlying architecture that you can intersect with that with any mechanical system you choose. So,
cool.
Basically, OSR, fine. 5e only, maybe not.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah. Let's go to the Chain Lightning round. A treasure that can be found in some bramble is described thusly. The bramble consists of a thorned silver-green hedge coated in some sort of petrified honey. Shards can be broken off and have a soft rose petal flavor.
A 3-headed heron alights upon shallow water, unmoving, yet watchful. A silver key on a braided cord dangles around its neck. Although I notice it doesn't specify which neck.
A mannequin unclasps the chitin-lined cloak at their shoulders, revealing an illuminated orb within their skeletal ribcage. It dims as another mannequin removes it and replaces it with a new orb. The new one crackles with light.
The top half of the Petripede is an expertly crafted marble statue of a man's head and torso. The bottom half is a many-limbed, fleshy centipede-like thing with human arms for legs. A wide mouth gapes at the junction between the stone half and the flesh half.
Mage oil, thick and glistening like blood, oozes from the walls of the castle, signs of long decayed magic. It drips into the river and swirls, muddying the water. Let's go to the expert delve. Hi listeners, I wanted to let you know that new issues of Codex are now available in the Gauntlet Patreon feed. Codex is the Gauntlet's bi-monthly role-playing game magazine. Each issue is organized around a theme and stuffed with brand new material for your table, including original games and supplemental material for games like Trophy and Brindlewood Bay. Check out Codex by going to patreon.com/gauntlet. Your pledge not only gets you Codex and other Gauntlet publications, but it also supports all the important work we do in the Gauntlet, including this very podcast. If you'd like to try before you buy, there's always a free issue of Codex available on our website, gauntlet-rpg.com. And if you're looking for back issues, you can find them on DriveThruRPG, including in reduced price bundles. Thanks. It's the Expert Delve. Today we're talking about knowledge as treasure, a topic that I can't believe we haven't talked about yet. It feels like weirdly late in the show's life to be talking about it. But I think maybe part of the reason why we haven't talked about it yet is because based off of our notes, it looks like maybe we took the idea for granted.
Yeah, I think so. When you suggested it, my first reaction was, okay, fine. And then my second thought was, wait, is there anything to say about this?
Yeah.
But then looking at how, and I think the reason that Academy Chrysalis has specific mechanics in it that deal with knowledge as treasure is sort of driven by the way that the cycle of play works in Trophy Gold. And that is what made me realize that, actually, what's happened is I we do have a system for handling knowledge as treasure, but it's just internalized in our play culture or whatever.
Right.
And actually, there's probably a fair amount to break out of and explore from that default assumption that I had in my head.
Yeah, I had kind of a similar awakening, I suppose, to it. This is one of those rare expert delves where the expertise is actually coming from the module we're covering.
That's true. Normally it's a bit of a tangent, isn't it? But yeah, in this case, specifically, I mean, it's written there, right? It's a chapter heading, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I just took it as kind of for granted, basically. Like, of course, knowledge can have monetary value. That makes perfect sense. But I'd never really given it a lot of thought until I started reading this, honestly. And I was like, oh, it sort of occurred to me that there are just these issues that you have to contend with if you genuinely want knowledge to function as treasure in your game. Who is purchasing this knowledge, right?
Yeah.
Do we role play that? Or more likely, do we just hand wave it away? If the knowledge is of a sort that people would be willing to pay money for it, how does it affect the campaign going forward? To me, that's the most interesting question. The world doesn't care if you sell a handful of rubies or silver tchotchkes to a merchant back in town, but the world absolutely cares and should respond if you sell knowledge that the line of kings has been secretly consorting with demons this whole time. It has a bigger implication for the world. And so there's a part of me that wants to just say, okay, we just make it totally transactional and we don't dwell on it and we don't worry about it. But I think that's the less fun option. It's the less
and actually,
interesting option, right?
If I have a problem with the way Academy Chrysalis has dealt with this, and actually I really don't, because the reason it's done this is because of how, as I mentioned, how trophy gold works, is that you come back to town, you need to have gold to spend to pay off your debts, otherwise you're out of the game. It's like the most surefire way to kill a trophy gold character is actually through debt, not adventuring. Just like real life. So, but my problem with it is that it solves the knowledge as treasure problem by just making it money. But of course, as you said, that's not really the case. You can sell rubies, and inflation or gluts in the market notwithstanding, those rubies can be resold, or you could go get more rubies, and they're functionally the same thing. But some knowledge, once it has been transmitted however you want to another person or some people, that changes the nature of what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like lighting a fire from one candle to another. You don't have less fire. Similarly, knowledge is a bit like that. But having said that, I do think it's really interesting. Maybe if we don't think about it in terms of gold treasure, but rather as just assigning value to knowledge, I think that's really interesting. And it's something that traditionally has driven a lot of adventures. And also, there's something I think about emphasizing knowledge rather than loot or profits or whatever. That kind of works around the often fruitful, but not always entirely desirable conflict, which is that where the typical D&D party is a kind of anarchist collective that, no one's in charge and they don't really, they distribute items as needed amongst the party usually. And yet they're always in this ruthlessly capitalist milieu where they have to be bringing in sacks of treasure all the time.
Yeah.
So that's good. And if you're looking more at knowledge than at gold, it also bypasses my usually least favourite part of dungeon exploring, which is, how are we going to get this gold back to town? Which, except for mandatory reference to Treasure of the Sierra Madre here, is usually not that interesting, right? So
someone just got a bingo. So
yeah, somebody send in a photo of your card, and we'll send you a hat or a t-shirt or something. Yeah. So I don't know. What do you think? Am I being too picky about this?
It sounds like what you're saying is, well, why have knowledge as treasure? And once you ask the question, why knowledge is treasure, then you have to interrogate another question, which is, well, how knowledge is treasure? Right?
And also why is treasure if you're doing knowledge, I suppose, as well. So,
yeah, it's interesting. And like I said, I think there's a world where play groups just don't care, and you just and it's not maybe a big thing you focus on. I actually love the idea of focusing on it because of how Academy Chrysalis handles it. I think it's really, really interesting, and I think there's something to be gained there. I agree with you though, just this idea of kind of just sticking, before we get into Academy Chrysalis's approach, before we get into that, I do think there's something interesting to be said about the implications of knowledge and what it means for your campaign. I have so often given out a treasure in any game I'm running and being like, oh, it's worth X amount of money to the right buyer. Well, that never gets followed up on. What the hell does to the right buyer mean?
Absolutely never.
It's nothing, right? Yeah. Although, I suppose if a player was like, well, you told me that this was worth X gold in general, but it was worth X gold times 2 to the right buyer, I'd like to go find the right buyer, you know?
Yeah, that would be a good adventure.
Yeah, if a player put me on the spot there, I would have to react to that, right?
Yeah.
I'd have to be like, okay, well, who might the right buyer be? And yeah, you're right. And so now you're talking about adventure threads and, and different things to do. And I will say that part of the reason why it never gets followed up on in my games is just because of the way I organize games and where like it's rarely the same group over a long campaign. But even if I was doing like a long-term campaign, I would hope I would be able to react to that and answer the question, what does it mean to have the right buyer? Does that mean a brand new adventure? Does that mean a little side quest or something? Like, what does it mean? Does that person have their own agenda, their own like thing that they're doing? And then you get to that bigger question of, if this knowledge is so important that someone's willing to pay for it, what does it mean for the world, right? And I think that's kind of what Academy Chrysalis does, which I think is so cool.
Yeah, well, actually, maybe could we discuss or summarize briefly what Academy Chrysalis does with
We should,
with
yeah.
And then we can compare other ideas to that, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, so let's get to it. The Academy Chrysalis has this subsystem for knowledge is treasure. And as Tom mentioned, the subsystem is keyed to Trophy Gold's particular needs in terms of its structure of play. But I do think that you could probably adapt this to any sort of dungeon delving game, if I'm being honest. The way it works is there are certain things called out in the module that are knowledge as treasure. And what you're meant to do is, I think you're meant to like actually print it out or maybe write it down or something, but you get it on a strip of paper.
Yeah, right. Little slips of paper that you hold on to.
Slips of paper, yeah. The paper says like what the knowledge is and maybe gives you a little bit of backstory on whatever the little history bit is. And then it tells you the value. And then that slip of paper is either group property because we were all there when we learned it, or it is held by the 1 or 2 players who were there when it was learned. And those slips of paper are there forever until someone decides to cash them in. And so if it's a group knowledge, the player who decides to go ahead and go sell it gets the money, right? I like the idea of that competitive dynamic, that sort of intra-party thing. Or if it's just something that you're holding on to, you can choose to go sell it whenever you want and get the money. But here's the really like interesting bit. I mean, that part's cool, but the really, really interesting part is after you cash in the knowledge, you then have to have a discussion. And I handled it almost like procedurally. You have this discussion about, well, how has the world changed? Because that knowledge is now out in the world. How has the world changed? How has the people that the knowledge was taken from, how are they affected by it? And this really gets to the stuff I talked about in the beginning of Patrick having like a really particular point of view here as far as colonialist exploitation and violence. How does that knowledge affect the land? How does it affect the people? How does it affect whoever comes after? How does it affect the people who came before? And the way I did it is for each piece of knowledge, I just had like a really particular question. I made the player answer about like how the world has changed. But there's something about like memorializing that, even if it's something that players never interact with again, just the fact that we took the time to memorialize it makes it feel special and significant.
Yeah, and I think you could even extend that a bit in the longer term with something a bit like how Stars Without Number that has faction turns where you have a kind of between sessions bit of business. I wouldn't go quite as in depth as that, but I think you could have a procedure. It could be a regular thing at the start of each new session, maybe, where you pick out not every bit of knowledge that you've sold, but maybe just the 1 or 2 you're most interested in, and ask that question again. What's happened now? Who knows this now?
Yeah.
How has that changed again? So you could draw these threads over time. I think that would be very interesting to, again, because that's a good little out of character, omniscient storytelling way to invest yourself in the world at large a bit more. But also it doesn't take too much time, right? You can just say, what happened with this and this happened.
That's the appeal. I think it answers a question that I kind of had, which is, what are the implications here? Like what are the implications of this knowledge being out in the world? Do we have to deal with this? Do we have to role play this? Is this like a whole other adventure? And I think that this procedure like kind of handles it in a really like clean, efficient way. It makes it feel impactful without having to really dwell on it too much. I really liked it in play. I thought it was great.
Yeah. If I may suggest some alternatives, though, not to disdain the Academy Chrysalis system in any way, but this made me think more about, have I seen this before? Well, the answer to this specifically, no. But it made me think of the original Deadlands game, which had a subsystem that, as I recall in that early rulebook, I think only took up maybe a bit of a page and was largely forgotten by most people. But it had a system where, like, a town that was being terrorized by monsters or what have you would have a fear level. And of course, the higher the fear level, the more powerful the ghosts and things that were fueled by terror would become. It was in your own interests as player characters, but also to the denizens of that area to lower the level of fear. And you could do that by having adventures, defeating the monsters, and then coming back to town and having your plucky reporter character tell the story of your adventure and success in a compelling way that would reassure the townsfolk and lower the fear level. And I think that is, well, to be honest, if you're playing Ravenloft or something, I would just steal that whole cloth.
And I think so too, yeah.
But I think a similar thing, and when we think about this adventurers, tomb breaker openers as well, it's not necessarily the money and the treasure and the jewels that you come back with that are the most interesting, but also telling tales. And I think you could quite easily, if you have a gold for XP experience system, you could just have the treasure that you can spend is just whatever handful of old coins you stole from a sarcophagus and that you buy beer with when you're in town. But the treasure you tell other people about, that would convert to XP. So you've now got a totally weightless experience mechanism. You don't need to bring a mule train. But I think that would be really interesting in terms of changing the dynamic of what you're doing. You're uncovering lost tombs and seeing exciting things.
Yeah. Well, and this is maybe like a tangential part of the conversation, but I do think that it also sort of responds to a criticism that's out there, especially in the last few years, about dungeon delving games, which is that what the characters are engaging in is fundamentally unethical, immoral thing of plundering tombs and disturbing the dead. That's not something I personally care about because I just don't dwell on such things when I'm doing my fantasy gaming. I get the criticism. If that is a criticism that means something to you, this would be an interesting way of responding to that, where the delving is not even necessarily so much about like killing the monsters and taking their treasure or raiding the tombs and taking the treasure as much as it is discovering the ancient world and bringing that back to the modern world, which is in a lot of ways is like the most fun of fantasy games. Well, when you're going into the lost and forgotten places of the world, it's because you want to learn about the lost and forgotten places of the world.
That's right. And that's why I think, and actually I think the killer reason that it's such a good idea to put more value on knowledge as a reward is that this is something that can be enjoyed by the players as much as the characters. So when your PC comes back wealthy beyond their dreams and buys a really fancy meal at the most expensive restaurant in the city, they enjoy that in character. You, however, are sitting around someone's dining table with Cheetos and not enjoying it. But when the character discovers a surprising and a fabulous and exciting fact or something like that, so do you at the same time. You are you get the same benefit. So, I think it has that wonderful cross. So, basically, it's not just identifying with your character more closely, although that's fun too. But frankly, sense of wonder is a lot of the reason, sense of discovery, sense of wonder, sense of solving a mystery. We all like solving a mystery.
We love those,
Yeah. Those are things that intellectually you experience in the same way your character does. And that's why knowledge is such a good kind of treasure, right? Yeah.
I love it. That feels like a good place to stop.
Yeah, sure.
I don't know if I have anything else to add.
Okay.
Let's go to the next segment. It's the companion adventures. I'll just throw out my play of this is on YouTube.
Okay, good.
If you want to see me playing it, go watch it. It was great. A lot of fun. What do you got, Tom?
I have a book that was later sort of turned into a film, and specifically the parts set on the Galapagos Islands in The Far Side of the World, which became the film Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World. Yeah, this is the sequence where, what's his name? The doctor guy, Maturin, just stops off and learns about these strange animals that he's never seen before, and he's like going around with his little assistant, picking up iguanas and saying, iguanas don't swim, wait a second, this kind of thing. Yeah. And I think if you want to have a look at it feels to me like the right kind of technological period for Trophy, maybe a bit later.
Yeah, probably a little later.
Yeah, but it's more like a Into the Odd era, isn't it, than Trophy. Yeah. But there's this real joy of discovery. If you look on YouTube, by the way, I've happened to find the extended version of this scene. I don't know if this particular shot is in the theatrical release of the film, but just basically Paul Bettany sitting surrounded by giant turtles and just just enjoying it.
I love it. I've got a role-playing game recommendation, and that is, it's only kind of like a sideways recommendation, I guess, really. But that is the Shab al-Hiri Roach by Jason Morningstar. Since we're talking about academia. And Lovecraftian horror academia, actually. The Shab al-Hiri Roach is great. I wouldn't say it's a perfect game. In fact, it's, even by Jason's own admission, it's like not a very good game mechanically. But it's a very, very fun game because it's about, you get to play like evil, backstabbing college professors.
Yeah, I think it's one of those ones where the color overcomes any deficiencies.
It overcomes all the deficiencies.
Like having such a whale of a time. Yeah.
Every now and then, in order to get to one up your fellow professors, like because it's a competitive game, you're trying to like win, right? You can take a roach into your body, and the roach is a manifestation of a violent god king. And the roach gives you powers. And yeah, it's great. It's a really, really beautiful criticism of academia, and the game is not good but fun, and which I think is a thing you can say. Those are not mutually exclusive. You have a music recommendation, yes, Tom?
I do, a bit of a obscure one. So I'm recommending The Library of Babel. That is a 2021 Borgesian concept rap album based on the short story of the same name.
Only on Fear of a Black Dragon.
Only on Fear of a Black Dragon. By C.L. Brooks and Dweeb. And C.L. Brooks is spelt CLBRKS, all caps, all one word. Obviously, how else would you spell it? I will say it's a little unusual. Like, basically, if you listen to one track and you think, oh, I hope it's not all like this, it's all like that, so don't bother.
I love it. I am currently approaching somewhere around hour 200 of Elden Ring, and one of my favorite parts of Elden Ring, of many, many favorite parts, is there is a section that is the Academy of Raya Lucaria. And the story of the Academy of Raya Lucaria is basically the story of the Academy Chrysalis. They have this like resource, the glintstone, that they're like exploiting and, you know, ruining the land with. And it was the downfall of the Academy as well. And also just the sort of like physicality of the space. It's a really, really beautiful physical representation of a magic academy as an adventuring space. Just go watch some YouTube videos if you don't want to. Yeah,
I was about to say, I have a question about that.
That's about hour 75.
I was about to say, how many hours do I have to play to go see this thing? So, okay, YouTube it is, yeah.
Indeed. And listeners, that is our show. Fear of a Black Dragon is a production of The Gauntlet. You can find The Gauntlet on Twitter at GauntletRPG. We have a website. It's gauntlet-rpg.com. We have a Patreon. It's patreon.com/gauntlet. You can go support us there. Tom, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jason. Thanks also to our interphrastic editor, Rich Rogers, and to you, the listener, for listening. Goodbye.
Take care.